Well, we made it, everyone. Galaxy's Most Wanted is finally available. At least it was available for me. I was actually expecting this next Friday from when I'm posting this, but it actually came early and I was super pumped to get the email saying that it was available at my local game store. So we're going to be doing a hero review of both heroes. Today we're going to be looking at Groot, and the next video, which should be coming out the day after you're watching this, or it's already out depending when you're watching this, is going to be on Rocket Raccoon. And then I'm going to do a full breakdown, a full review of the entire campaign, as well as all the new keywords and everything new that's in the box for anyone who wants to know exactly what comes in here and how good it is. So very exciting stuff. I can't wait to jump in. Again, we're going to start with Groot today, but look forward to much more content on Galaxy's Most Wanted in the near future. So without further ado, let's jump right in. So kicking things off with the alter ego form of Groot, which is Groot. We are looking at growth spurt for the ability, which is action. Place 2 growth counters on Groot to a maximum of 10. You can do this once per round. So everything to do with Groot, if you're not unfamiliar with the character, is very much based on growth counters. All of his cards, or many of his cards, increase in power level based on how many growth counters are on Groot. So whereas some heroes, you're mostly going to alter ego form to heal up, to recuperate, and to, you know, potentially use their ability, Groot's is, I would say, very dependent on the ability. You're still potentially coming here to heal, but so much of Groot, especially when you play him as protection, is just trying to not take any damage, that even though his recovery is 4, I found myself actually only using that in certain situations. Generally, I'm coming to this form specifically to power back up my growth counters. Now, the way to look at this is that yes, you're adding on 2 growth counters, but because you're probably going to flip to alter ego and the next turn you're going to still start that turn in alter ego and flip out, you're essentially gaining 4 counters for flipping to this form. And there are cards that will add further growth counters to that number that are in the deck that we'll get to, but you can look at that as sort of the baseline. You're going to be flipping over to get 4 growth counters. Even with 4 growth counters, many of his cards see a huge boost in power level or efficiency and the ability to use them. So I would say that it's a pretty important for Groot to be able to come back to this form pretty often. All heroes in the game, you're wanting to come to alter ego at different points, but I found that for myself, so many other heroes, I just try to avoid going to alter ego. It's just my play style, especially when I'm playing with aggression and things like that. I'm just trying to see how long I can stay in hero form to be as effective as possible, and then I finally flip back to recover. Groot, I was flipping a little bit more often because I was choosing to use a lot of my growth counters very quickly for very powerful attacks, very powerful thwarts, and then flip back, recharge those growth counters, use one of his alter ego cards that's specific to that form, and then flip back all powered up and ready to go. So I think that his alter ego form is actually really cool, and it's thematically really, really cool. I think you'll spend a lot of time there, and you'll actually want to flip back to power up Groot so that your abilities on the next turn are more powerful. So overall, I think the alter ego side is pretty solid. Hit points are 10. I would say that's pretty average. Hand size is 6. You've come to expect that from alter ego forms. No surprises there, but overall, very cool alter ego. Okay, and on to the hero form, which is also Groot. So the ability here is Flora Colossus. Now, it is a forced interrupt, which is when Groot would take any amount of damage, instead remove that many growth counters from him, and for each growth counter removed, prevent 1 of that damage. So the easier way to say this is that anytime he would take damage, you remove growth counters instead. If you can't remove growth counters, then he'll actually take the damage. The important thing to note here is that it is a forced interrupt. You cannot choose to just take the damage instead and leave the growth counters, which is very important because so much of Groot's abilities rely on growth counters. If that wasn't a thing, if it wasn't forced, Groot would be way more powerful because you could choose when to lose growth counters, when not to, and you would hit the maximum much more often, much more frequently. So I would say that the forced interrupt is kind of a double-edged sword. It's protecting you from taking any damage, which is very important for a lot of Groot's cards and some of the new protection cards that were introduced, but at the same time you want those growth counters, so it's hindering you and it's quickening the pace at which you're going to have to return to alter ego form to recharge those back up. So it's a double-edged sword. You'll have to be aware of it. You're going to be wanting to use your defend a lot to mitigate the need to ever even remove growth counters, which comes into play with the fact that he has a high defense at 3, and he has several ways to increase that defense even further, or at least he has 1, and then the protection cards offer other options as well. So his thwart's low. There's ways to increase it. His attack is pretty decent at 2. His defend is obviously high at 3. Overall, I really enjoy the hero form. I like the mechanic. I have a lot of fun playing Groot. I came in expecting to have more fun playing Rocket than I do Groot, and I would say that it's pretty even, although I actually enjoy the playstyle more of Groot. It just meshes more with the way I enjoyed to play my heroes. So really important to note that you need to be trying to defend as often as possible to stop those growth counters from being removed so that your future turns are powerful. Yes, that might mean that Groot is sometimes exhausted when you're taking your turn, but there are so many powerful cards in Groot's deck that rely on growth counters that not being able to use one of his basic abilities, but being able to have a powered up version of some of his cards is the better trade-off in my experience, and I'm happy to do that. And there are ways, obviously, to be able to ready him because you've defended, things like that are in this deck. So overall, really, really cool hero card. Just be aware of the double-edged sword of the main ability. Sometimes it's going to remove a whole bunch of growth counters and set you back way more than you were expecting, and you'll have to flip back to Alter Ego form to try to recharge. Okay, first up with the hero cards is Fruition. So really good card, and one that I almost wished after having played Quicksilver and Black Panther, where they have some of their most powerful cards have like 4 copies, and which like normally you don't see that from any cards whatsoever. I almost wish that there was more copies of Fruition, not because it's crazy powerful in terms of like dealing damage or anything like that, but for a 0 cost to place 2 growth counters on Groot, this sets up so many of your cards without the need to go back to Alter Ego form. This is basically your Alter Ego ability for free on a single card. You're going to be using this pretty much every time it's in your hand. I use it every single time it was in my hand. The only time I didn't is if I was maxed out, obviously, then you can't use it. Or if you're really in a pinch and you need to play something else and you need the resource off this card, you can obviously do that as well. But generally, I'm always using Fruition. If you get 2 of them in your hand and you're adding 4 counters to Groot, especially if you came out of your Alter Ego form and you already have 4 counters on, going to 8 counters enables so many cards that could potentially be in your hand. It gives you so many counters to utilize off your ability cards in play, gives them longevity in terms of staying in hero form. Fruition is a very important card. I would say that you, like I said, use this anytime it's in your hand, especially if you have other cards in your hand that utilize growth counters, or you have cards in play for part of your kit that are going to want to remove growth counters. It'll just make it so that you can last in hero form a little bit longer. So overall, Fruition's a very good card. Like I said, I almost wish that there was just more of them in the deck. All right, moving on to I Am Groot. What did you expect with the card names here? 3 cost event, hero action, thwart, remove threat from a scheme equal to the number of growth counters on Groot. So this is our first instance of the number of growth counters on Groot mattering to the power level on the card itself. So I want to start this off by saying this is a great card. I don't want there to be any misinterpretations here. The ceiling on this is obviously ridiculously high. If you're at max growth counters, 3 cost to remove 10 threat is insane. I'm trying to think if there's another card in the game that even comes close to removing that much threat for that cost. If there might be, but if there is, I'm skipping on it right now. Regardless, it would be in the upper echelon. So it's a very, very good card. The only thing I want you to consider and I want to mention is that we're talking about the upper ceiling here of being at 10 growth counters, and out of all the games I played with Groot it was several games across the Galaxy's Most Wanted campaign, I only ever was at 10 growth counters once, and this wasn't in my hand. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's fair for us to rate this card on the top power level, because I don't know how often you're actually going to be there and have this card in your hand. There's only 2 copies, and it could be my play style. It could also be that, if I was flipping to Alter Ego more often, the 4 growth counters I'd be getting from that, potentially 5 if I have one of his other cards in play. Reliably, if I have Fruition in my hand, maybe it's becoming a lot easier, and I Am Groot is constantly hitting for 10 or frequently hitting for 10, and then it's insane. In my experience, it was actually more reliable that when this was in my hand, I was having an average growth counter turn or experience, and I would have, say 4, or probably more than 4, but 5, 6 growth counters in my hand. If you have 6 on Groot, if you have 6 growth counters on Groot, you're doing 6 threat removal for 3. If we compare that to 4 justice for 2 cost removes 4 threat. It's basically at the same power level, and 1 additional cost is gaining you 2 more threat. So which makes it, yes, more threat than 4 justice, but at the increased cost. So is that worth it? Absolutely, it's worth it to play. Is that an insane power level card? I wouldn't say it is, but again, it's the flexibility. It can be. If you hit 7, you're overpowered now. 8, 9, 10 are ridiculous off a single card, and the 6 threat, don't get me wrong, is still solid for 3 costs, and I think that's something you'll more reliably be hitting is 6 threat. And minimum, you're probably hitting always at least 4, I would think, because you can flip to Alter Ego and flip back, you'll get the 4. So 4 threat for 3. Not that great, but it's something you can use if you need. Overall, I just want you to consider that in my experience, you're not always going to have Groot completely maxed out on growth counters, just because you don't know when you're going to draw I Am Groot and what his state's going to be at with growth counters. And there's so many other things you're doing with Groot that involves those growth counters that it's hard to always have him set up for this card specifically. So, and on top of that, 10 threat is a lot, but how many times are you going to be in a situation where you have 10 counters, you have this in your hand, and you have 10 threat on a scheme? All those things have to line up. It's not like damage where you'll always be happy to deal 10 damage. You have to have enough threat on the scheme for that to actually hit for full value, and you have to have 2 other conditions. So in that sense, it's kind of situational. Again, it's still a great card. It's just right away you want to evaluate it by the ceiling, and I would say that the ceiling is not always going to be what you're working under with this card. So just keep that in mind. Otherwise, still a fantastic card. It might just not always be the super overpowered card that you're looking at. Next up, we have I Am Groot, which is the capitalized version of the previous card, which makes sense because this is the attack version of the previous card. So the last one we were talking about involved how many growth counters you had on Groot, and that being how much threat you're going to remove. This is a 2-cost event, hero action, deal damage to an enemy equals to the number of growth counters on Groot. So this is the damage version. I think this is in my opinion, this is a better version. It's cheaper. It's 2 costs instead of 3, and the damage is more flexible. It's not like the threat where you're going to sometimes not have the threat on the scheme that you're wanting to remove at max value. You'll always most likely be wanting to deal as much damage as possible. For 2 cost, I would say that you want to be trying to hit, for this to be really worth paying other cards for in your hand. You want to be trying to hit 5 damage, I would say, to consistently. That 5 damage for 2, I think I'd be happy to do that all the time. Again, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 damage for 2 is insane. It gets better as it goes, and all of those things are absolutely possible. The flexibility here doesn't go unnoticed. Like in a pinch, if I have 3 growth counters on them, I can do 3 damage for 2. If I really need a source of damage on something, that flexibility, it's not worth the cost necessarily, but it's something you can still use, and it's there, and you will sometimes get some value out of those little hits as well. But again, the ceiling of 10 damage is obviously ridiculous for 2, and hitting for 6 for 2 is still fantastic, and that's pretty reliable. I would say it's not that hard to have 6 growth counters on Groot, especially because you get 4 on the flip. So overall, I think this is a really solid card. I prefer it to the thwart version. Again, that just gels a little bit more with my playstyle as well. I used it a whole ton. It rarely went through my hand without being used, unless I was on the tail end of using Groot and I had a single growth counter on him. Then maybe it ends up being a resource. Other than that, really great card. You'll be using it a lot. Moving on to Root Stomp, which has 3 copies in the deck. I think this is the card that has the most copies in Groot's hero cards. So this is a 2-cost event, hero action, attack, deal 5 damage to an enemy. If this attack defeats that enemy, you place 1 growth counter on Groot. Overall, super solid card. I wouldn't say it's overly flashy. It's a huge 5 attack called Root Stomp, so it's a bit flashy, but we've come to expect sometimes ridiculously overpowered attack cards out of heroes. This isn't that necessarily, but don't underestimate the value of the growth counter. Any way that you can add growth counters when you're in hero form is a huge deal for Groot, because you're saving yourself from having to flip your alter ego and have that recharge turn to get them back on, and you can stay in hero form and still power up all your other cards. So this is 1 extra threat on some of his cards. It's 1 extra attack on one of his cards. It's extra threat or attack on your base stats. It's potentially a ready on Groot. There's so many things that this can become that that 1 growth counter is a big deal. 5 damage is also solid for 2. All around, it's a pretty solid card. I think that I used it most times it was in my hand. The only thing you have to consider is that because you want to defeat an enemy to get that growth counter, and you really want to be getting that growth counter when you're using it, preferably, it's going to depend how many minions you're up against. If you're up against a deck that doesn't have a lot of minions, or they're a lot stronger than 5 and you can't reliably kill them with Root Stomp, you're going to get a lot less value out of Root Stomp. It's not horrible. It's still good to deal 5 damage for 2. Like, don't get me wrong, that's still a solid hit. It's just the growth counter is the extra incentive that you really want to put it over the top. And to hit that, you obviously need minions that you're going to be killing. So keep that in mind. In decks where you can reliably have like 3 and 4 and 5 health cost minions or lower out in play that you can be killing with Root Stomp, getting some growth counters, doing some other powered up abilities, that turn will feel really, really good. And there's 3 copies, so you'll be seeing this a lot. Okay, moving on. You knew it was coming. We Are Groot. This is a 1-cost event hero action. Remove up to 4 growth counters from Groot. That's 1, 2, 3, or 4, your choice. Choose that many friendly characters and give each of them a tough status card. This is a really powerful card. It might be one that, you know, with all the other flashy attacks and thwarts and everything that you kind of glance over, only read once and don't really think about too much, but it is a really powerful card because it's such a low cost and an efficient way to get tough status cards on yourself and your other allies. So, or the people you're playing with. So for 1 cost to remove a single growth counter to put a tough status card on is completely worth it. To do 2 growth counters and still only 1 cost to put 2 tough status cards on. You have to look at it as, you know, if you put a tough status card on yourself and the person you're playing with for a single cost and 2 growth counters, and then that soaks up 2 huge villain attacks or minion attacks, that is insane value for 1 cost. It cannot be understated how powerful this card is and what the ceiling is on it, especially if you're playing with 4 people. Giving all of them tough status cards can potentially negate villains' attacks for the entire turn, allowing everyone to stay in hero form going into the villain phase. There's tons of possibilities. It's a really powerful card, and I think you'll be using it often. I use it a lot even just to add a single tough status card on because I had the efficiency with the cards in my hand to be able to do it. Again, if you're low on growth counters, this might not be where you want to spend them when you have so many other things you're trying to do with them. But that being said, I still think it's absolutely worth it. Okay, we're moving on to Groot's kit now. Now, for anyone who doesn't know when I use the word kit, depending on how new or you are to Marvel Champions, kit is usually just setting up different support and upgrade cards in front of yourself to really power up your hero. Every hero has this kit that they come with that they generally want to get into play to make themselves a lot more powerful. A hero like Iron Man has a way more important kit because he relies on it. But all characters have some form of kit. Groot's is really interesting because they all cost 1. It's super easy to get his kit into play. You're never having to say, oh, am I going to spend the 3 to do this, or am I going to discard this card? Generally, if you have them in your hand, you're playing them. They're very easy to get out. The first one is Fertile Ground. This is the Alter Ego kit card. Very good card. Alter Ego action, exhaust Fertile Ground, place 1 growth counter on Groot, and draw a card. I saw a distinct boost in my game and how it went, my power level, when I started the game with this in my hand or I got it out in the first couple turns. Being able to flip to Alter Ego form, and now instead of getting 4 growth counters across both turns, like as you flip out, increasing that to 6 is such a huge deal because you can reliably get 6 growth counters every flipped Alter Ego. You get 2 on your base Alter Ego ability and 1 on this, and the next turn before you flip out, you do it all again. So 6 growth counters reliably is a huge deal. Being able to do 6 damage on the attack card now for 2, 6 thwart baseline for 3 makes that card reliably better. You get 2 card draw on top of that, so you not only gain 6 growth counters, you gain 2 cards added to your hand as well. Like, there's so many benefits here. So this is a card that if you have it in your hand in the beginning, please play it. You have no reason not to play. Get it out. And if you get it late in the game, it's still worth it. Put it out. It's more growth counters. It's more card draw. You really can't go wrong for 1 cost. If this was 1 cost and it was just Alter Ego draw a card, I'd probably still play it to get the extra card draw. Card draw is obviously super important in Marvel Champions. You have tons of cards provided, and some of the basic cards like Avengers Mansion cost 4 to get you an extra card draw every turn. Like, there's a lot of value to card draw. For it to be 1, yes, you have to be an Alter Ego, still worth it, and the growth counter is just the cherry on top. So very, very good card. You definitely want to play this when you have it. Next up is Entangling Vines. This is the Thwart kit card for Groot. 1 cost upgrade. When Groot makes a basic thwart, remove 1 growth counter from him and exhaust Entangling Vines to give Groot +2 thwart for that thwart. So great card because Groot only has 1 thwart. This makes him an effective thwart remover. Generally, that's not something he is, but depending on how you're playing Groot, especially if you're playing him solo, this makes you way more versatile and able to deal with those things. Important to keep in mind, this only gives you the +2 thwart for that single thwart action. You're not gaining +2 thwart for the rest of the turn, which means that there are ways you can ready Groot. You won't have that +2 thwart for the subsequent thwarts after that. That would make it insanely powerful. I almost wish that's what it did, but it's still very good. Being able to reliably have 3 thwart instead of 1, really, really good. Again, and depending on the scenario where if you're playing solo and you don't have a lot of ways to remove thwart, this is something you're going to be relying on a lot to mitigate the fact that you have that weakness in your character. So overall, a very good card and a very important kit card. Okay, moving on to Lashing Vines. This is probably one of the most exciting cards in this kit and one of the most useful. For 1 cost, after Groot uses a basic power, you can remove 2 growth counters and exhaust Lashing Vines to ready Groot. This enables a whole bunch of stuff for you. So what I like to say is this gives you the potential for your go all out turns, which is an awful name, but this basically allows you to, let's say, for instance, you use your thwart to start and you also use Entangling Vines to give it +2 thwart. You've now thwarted for 3. You can enable Lashing Vines to be able to ready again. Then you can use the card we're going to talk about right away, which is the attack version of that thwart card, which gives you +2 attack. Now you can attack for 4. And basically on a single turn, you've attacked for 4, you've thwarted for 3, and you've spent 4 growth counters to do it. So you've exhausted a bunch of his growth counters. You might have to flip back to recharge, but you've had a nice turn just with your basic cards, let alone whatever you're going to do in your hand. So it enables some big turns, and it enables a bunch of different functionality because you're readying. One of the most important uses that I found for Lashing Vines, the one I used most frequently, is because you want to defend so often with Groot, because you don't want the growth counters to have to be removed, you want to defend and reliably mitigate all the damage. You're going to be defending a lot, and not all the time will you be able to find a way to ready Groot out of the defend. Like, there are cards that are in protection and things like that that can allow you to ready after you defend, but sometimes you're not. This allows you to ready Groot, and that makes your turn more effective. You can do more things with them after you've defended an attack and mitigated all the growth counters from being removed. So that's where I used it the most, but there's a whole bunch of functionality from it. Either way, I think you're going to be using it a lot. It's expensive at 2 growth counters, but again, it's enabling some pretty powerful turns. Okay, next up is Vine Shield. Not a ton to say about this one. It's kind of what you'd expect. It's the defense version of his kit. When Groot defends against an attack, remove 1 growth counter from him, exhaust Vine Shield, Groot gets +3 defense. Obviously a really good card. He already has 3 defense to start. This is giving him 6 defend on whatever attack is coming in. That's more often than not, that's going to mitigate the entire attack. So you're spending a growth counter, but you're potentially stopping having to remove, 3 growth counters or 4 growth counters or 5 growth counters, depending on how much damage is coming in on you. So it's a card you're going to use a lot. It's a small price to pay for that extra defense. It's going to make it so that Groot barely ever takes damage. 6 defense is very, very high. And if you get this out early, you're reliably having 6 defense. So really, really good card. I use this a lot. It might have been the one I used the most, just to reliably make sure I was mitigating the growth counters being lost. Not a whole lot else to say, just that it's a great card and you'll be using it a lot. And finally, it's the attack version of his kit. This is the last hero card. Vine Spikes. When Groot makes a basic attack, remove 1 growth counter from him and exhaust Vine Spikes to give him +2 attack. So he has base 2 attack. This is giving him 4 attack on a swing. Again, for a single growth counter, just like the other cards. It's really good. You're going to have the growth counters to spare more often than not. 4 attack is a great amount for a base ability. If you pair it with the ability to ready Groot with one of his other cards. I'm forgetting the name of all these cards because they all have Vi in the title, and in different combinations. But the one that allows you to spend 2 growth counters to ready Groot, you can attack twice. That's 6 damage in a single turn reliably, as long as you have 3 growth counters on him to be able to do that. It's a great card. You're going to be using it a lot, especially if you're wanting to be, deal damage with Groot. If that's the way you're playing. If you're playing solo and you're the only source of damage, this is a great way to do it. If you're playing multiplayer and you need to add in some damage, this is another great way to do it. So Vine Spikes is a really good card, and that is the last one of the kit. If you get the entire kit out for Groot, you're going to be super powerful, and it's not hard to do that because they all cost 1. As long as you draw them, you're probably playing them. I usually end up with a full kit for Groot, and the possibilities of my turn just are endless. All right, moving right on to the protection cards, and we're going to start with the protection ally, which is Starhawk. Really interesting card. I really like it. I love the design. Put power level aside for a second. I just really like the way this card's designed and the potentials it opens up. 2 cost ally. 2 cost allies are great. So really great start. 3 health, 1 thwart, 2 attack, 1 consequential damage on the thwart, 2 on the attack. Important to remember that. Interrupt. When Starhawk takes damage exactly equal to his remaining hit points, you get to return them to your hand. So the ability to be able to have a 2-cost ally that can be a blocker and you keep getting him back is really, really powerful. Let's start with that. The way that this sees the highest ceiling and the most potential is that if he can take an attack from a minion or a villain and have that be what is the exact damage needed to return to your hand, that's probably best case scenario. I think if you can play Starhawk, use a thwart or an attack, soak up a hit, and then also return to your hand, that's and then use them again is obviously the best rotation you can get with them. The caveat being that he needs to obviously take exact damage, but you can control that a little bit better with minions. A minion, you'll know if it doesn't have a boost card coming, if it does 1 or 2 damage. You can time Starhawk to say, you know, I'm going to do this attack because I know he'll take 1 damage from this minion, I'll get him back, or vice versa. So you can control it with minions. I would say that's the best case scenario, is you can constantly be taking minion attacks and getting him back and playing him again. The villain is going to be a little bit less reliable, and generally he's probably going to do more than one. The villain's going to do more than 1 or 2 attack on you, but if he does, you can't really account for that. You might just get lucky and soak up a villain hit and get him back. The other option is that you can proactively do it on your turn. So the reason I said the consequential damage was important is that with his 3 health, he can reliably do a thwart and 2 attack, and you get him back. Because if he dies with that exact damage on your turn, you'll get him back and you can play him again. So you could play him, do a thwart, on your next turn, do an attack, he returns to your hand, play him again, do an attack or a thwart, have him as a blocker. There's so much potential here, and I just love the design of him bouncing back and forth and you being able to control it. It's not too luck-based unless you leave it up to the villain's attack. You can pretty much control how Starhawk comes to your hand, or whether you just say, I don't need him in my hand, I just need him to soak this big hit. I think he's a great ally with 2 health, 2 resource cost. For all this, I think is just phenomenal. Again, I think that he's going to make it his way into a lot of decks, and I think that there's going to be people wanting to play him proactively and constantly being attacking and thwarting and getting him back, and others in minion specific situations being able to soak those hits up, get him back, put him out, attack, soak up a hit, take him back, put him out. Like, it's just a great rotation. It feels great. It feels overpowered even though it's not, and those are the cards that usually have the most fun playing, and they just are the most satisfying to play. So I'm a huge fan of Starhawk, and I can't wait to use them more beyond Groot. Next up is Fighting Fit, which is a really exciting protection card, and I think is going to help a lot of protection decks out there. 2 cost, hero action, deal 2 damage to the villain, 5 damage instead if your hero's remaining hit points are equal to or greater than your hero's starting hit points. So we're going to see a couple of these cards where you have to be at your max health or above your max health for them to get more powerful. Important to note, this is only damage done to the villain. That obviously limits its effectiveness if you can't reliably use it on a minion, where you might be in a situation where that's what you specifically want it for. However, 5 damage to the villain for 2 if you're playing a protection ally and looking for ways to deal damage and whittle the villain down, especially in solo play. This is really, really important and still is a very, very strong card and great to see for the protection aspect. Obviously, it works great in Groot, so I can see why they put it into Groot, because Groot is reliably going to be at his max health. He's not going to be over his max health, but with his growth counters there to protect him, you'll be at full health a lot, which makes this consistently at 5 damage for 2, which is great in protection. Another hero that this would be phenomenal for is Protection Iron Man. Iron Man is reliably above his health and can take damage and still be able to use Fighting Fit for its max potential. There's obviously more out there, but generally those are 2 that came to mind right off the bat. It's a great card. If you have to use it for the 2 damage, not very good. if you really needed 2 damage for 2, and you can do that, it has that flexibility, but you can't be picking off a minion for that, which, doing 2 damage to the villain for 2 just seems like a waste most of the time unless you really need to do it. So generally, you're going to want to put this into a deck where you can reliably be at full health because of the way you're defending, the way you're set up. Quicksilver, for instance, could work if you're reliably defending twice a turn to keep Quicksilver at max health. There's tons of possibilities. I'm just excited about the potential it opens up, and I'm happy to see more damage-dealing cards in protection. Next up is Dauntless. This is a 1-cost protection upgrade. Play under any player's control, max 1 per player. While your hero's remaining hit points are equal to or greater than your hero's starting hit points, your hero gains Retaliate 1. So it's a decent card. I'm not a huge fan of Retaliate as a mechanic, and I know that might be blasphemy because Retaliate can be very good, especially if you get it out early and you're taking a lot of hits, picking off 1 damage on minions, picking off 1 damage on the villain, taking off status cards. It's all worth it, don't get me wrong. It's just to play this and for it to be limited that you have to be at max or above health, that already limits the space to specific heroes or setups where you're reliably, not taking a lot of damage. And Retaliate 1 is just an overtime thing. If you only get a couple damage out of it because you get it out late or something, it's not nearly as worth it. If you get out very early and you're constantly through the game dealing 1 damage and it adds up to, you know, doing like 10, 12, 14 damage over the course of the game, it's obviously great it's insane for 1 cost. Because you can play this under any player's control, you don't have to necessarily worry about both copies in the rest of your deck after you play one being dead. You can play one under your the other person you're playing with. In a solo game, having 3 of these in your deck probably overkill, because then you're playing, it's coming up more often. You'll have more reliably get it out in the first turn of the game, but then you have 2 dead cards for the rest of the game in place. So it's an okay card. It has the potential to be very good, and I don't want to downplay the retaliate as an ability and what it can do. Just my personal play style, I was usually using it as a resource to facilitate other more exciting things that I'm doing on my turn. But again, if it's in your opening hand, definitely play it. You'll probably see the value over time very quickly. Okay, and last up with the new protection cards is Hard to Ignore. This is a really cool card. 1 cost upgrade. After your hero defends against an attack and takes no damage, exhaust Hard to Ignore and remove 1 threat from the main scheme. So, first thing I want to note right off the bat is, in case you didn't realize, because a lot of cards that are featured in these aspects say max 1 per player, this does not. You can put all 3 Hard to Ignores into play underneath your character, which is where it gets insanely powerful, because then every single time you defend and take no damage, you are exhausting all of them and removing 3 threat from a scheme, which is ridiculous that you can do that every single turn. Even with 1 or 2 out in play, still really good. In Groot specifically, you are reliably not taking damage every time you defend, especially if you have his kit card out and you basically have 6 defense. You're doing that almost every turn. So you're reliably removing 1 threat every single time you're in hero form and you're taking an attack. That adds up. Over the course of the game, you'll easily remove 8 to 10 threat from 1 card alone, let alone if you get 2 into play in that doubles or 3 into play in that triples. So huge ceiling on these cards, very good. And in protection, where you might not be having a lot of cards that are reliably removing threat, but you might need to do that, this enables you to just passively in basically keep doing what you're doing otherwise as part of the protection hero, and passively remove threat from the main scheme. Important to note, it is only the main scheme, so you still will need ways to remove threat from the side schemes if that's something that is coming into play with the villain you're playing, or you're getting a lot of downsides from the side schemes that are in play and you need to deal with them. You can't use this to deal with them, but it will keep the main scheme under control and prevent that from flipping over. So I'm really, really impressed by this card. I had a lot of fun playing with it, and I'm excited to see how it slots in with other heroes. Okay, Rocket Raccoon, the new basic ally. 3 cost ally, 3 health, 2 thwart, 1 attack, 1 consequential damage on each of those. Play only if your identity has the Guardian trait. Interrupt when Rocket Raccoon attacks a minion. He gets +3 attack for that attack, and that attack gains overkill. Very high ceiling with this card. So the way to look at it is, if every single turn you attack with Rocket until he dies, if you didn't use him to block, if you just did 3 attacks with him, and every single time you attacked a minion, you're doing 12 damage for 3 costs, and 9 of that damage is being, if even in a better situation, if you had done this, say, against Ultron, and each of those minions only had a single health, 9 of that 12 damage is also overkilling onto the villain. So you're doing, for 3 costs, 9 damage to the villain and destroying 3 minions in play. That's obviously a very specific situation, and that's the highest possible ceiling, I would say, with Rocket. Again, you can also be blocking with Rocket to soak up attacks. You don't necessarily have to hit the full ceiling to see the full value. Even just doing a single attack 4/4, on a minion can be super useful even without the overkill going through. So there's a lot of flexibility with Rocket. I think he's really powerful. I think because he's basic, it opens up a ton of possibilities. Keep in mind, at the current state of the game when I'm making this, which is Galaxy's Most Wanted just coming out, you're pretty limited with the decks you can slot this into, because your identity has to have the Guardian trait. Doesn't mean you can't put them in your deck, but it'll just be a resource for a lot of heroes in the game. As we release more Guardian heroes, the design space opens up. There'll be more heroes that can incorporate Rocket in, and we'll start seeing new possibilities show up as well. So I'm excited by Rocket. I think that he's going to be super fun to play with, and especially if you're against a lot of minions, I think this is a great card to slot in. Okay, next up we have another team up card. We've been seeing these a lot lately. This is Flora and Fauna, 1 cost team up for Groot and Rocket, obviously, max 1 per deck. Hero action plays 2 growth counters on Groot. and ready him, or place 2 charge counters on a Rocket Raccoon upgrade and ready that upgrade. So we're covering Groot today, we're not covering Rocket, but Rocket's whole character is based around tech upgrades that have counters on them for uses, or to be able to use them, I should say. So this is a great card. It's very flexible. It's way better if you're playing specifically with Groot and Rocket as heroes, because you can apply it to yourself or to the other person that's controlling the other character. You have the flexibility to say which one do you want to do. If you're playing with just the team up working because you have the other ally in play, like if I'm playing with Rocket in play as an ally and Groot as the hero, less flexibility. You have to use the Groot one, obviously, but it's still great. Whenever I use this, because I did go through the campaign with Rocket and Groot, when I use this, I generally found myself using it more for Groot's. Being able to ready him and get 2 growth counters for 1 was just too good to pass up. That being said, if you have Particle Cannon in play for Rocket, or a really powerful, useful tech card that needs more uses or is out of uses, or counters, I should say, being able to add them back on and ready that tech card is really, really powerful. Rocket can have a turn where he uses one of his strong tech cards, uses this Flora and Fauna to put 2 more counters back on it, ready it, use it again. Tons of possibilities there. They're both great. I just personally found myself using it for Groot a little bit more. It was just worked out when I drew this card, but they're both really good. I would say this is a really strong team up card. Some of the other team up cards I've admittedly said, like I think it was the Order and Chaos one for Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch was a little bit more situational. I didn't quite use it as much. It was still good. This one I would say is just excellent. It's almost always useful when you draw, and you're always going to feel good using it for 1 cost. So really big fan of Flora and Fauna. Okay, the last player card we're going to go over is Deft Focus, and it may be the most exciting, and I'll tell you why. 1 cost upgrade, max 1 per player, hero action, exhaust it, reduce the resource cost of the next superpower card you play this turn by 1. Now, the reason this is so exciting is because this is going to open up tons of possibilities across multiple heroes in the game, and it's going to increase the power level of a lot of them as well, being able to have this in play and reduce those cards by 1. So for instance, Hulk has a bunch of superpower cards, and Hulk is notoriously thought of by a lot of people. I shouldn't say notoriously, but a lot of people consider him to be, underwhelming or less powerful than he should be. This helps him out and makes all the superpower cards cost 1 less when you have one of these in play. Captain Marvel sees a boost from this. Quicksilver sees potentially a massive boost from this, reducing all his cards by 1, and he has a bunch of superpowers. The design space for this card is vast. There's so many characters that can benefit off this. Those are some of the higher ones I've mentioned, but there's other characters like Miss Marvel and Iron Man that have cards that could benefit from this at a lesser extent. I think this is just a great card to introduce to the game. Groot himself has a bunch of superpower cards. It's a great character to introduce him with. I love when they introduce cards like this that make you go back and reevaluate heroes that are in the game, try new decks, and realize whether the power level is increasing because of them. I think that's super exciting, and it's great for the design space in the game. So I'm super, super pumped that Deft Focus has come into this into Groot's pack into the game now, and I cannot wait to try him out in some of those decks, especially Quicksilver and especially Hulk. Those are the first 2 I'm definitely going to be jumping in and testing this card out. Let's briefly talk about Wilt, which is the obligation card. It's exactly what you'd expect from an obligation. The only thing I will mention is that the option to remove 3 growth counters from Groot to discard this obligation is actually not that bad. If you're in a situation where you can spend them, this card is going to allow you to flip to Alter Ego to start. So you're going to flip to Alter Ego. You're going to remove 3 growth counters, but you're going to be able to gain 2 of them back this turn, potentially 3 if you have his Alter Ego kit card in play. And then next turn, you're going to add another 2 or 3 onto him. So you're going to gain those growth counters back really quickly. It's not actually that bad to use the second option on this obligation to be able to deal with it. So I just wanted to mention that in terms of obligations, this one isn't as bad as it could be. You can deal with it pretty effectively. Next up is Furnax, which is the Nemesis. Pretty nasty Nemesis, 6 health, obviously tough to deal with, 2 scheme and 2 attack, and forced response whenever Furnax will activate with one of those on you. Deal 2 indirect damage to each player. Lots of damage incoming from Furnax, and he's tough to deal with 6 health. I love Nemesis cards that have high power levels and are hard to deal with. I think this is definitely one of them. You're going to have to actually spend time to deal 6 damage to him. And if you don't, you're going to feel the effects of leaving him in play, because he's going to be dealing damage all around, not just to you, but to all the players in the game. So I'm a big fan of Furnax because of the fact that I like strong Nemesis cards. I'm sure when I actually play in a situation where Furnax comes out, or like I have with the campaign, I'm going to feel less positive about how powerful it is, but I'm excited that they are introducing more Nemesis cards that are stronger and tougher to deal with. Okay, let's talk about the side scheme, which is Blazing Inferno. It's going to have 3 threat tokens on it for each player, and they force responses after the villain phase begins, deal 2 indirect damage to each player. Pretty strong side scheme. It's luckily very easy to deal with. That's not a lot of counters on it. I think it'll be relatively easy to deal with, not incredibly easy to deal with, but it's pretty pesky. 2 indirect damage might not seem like a lot, but if you're playing with like 3 or 4 players, that's 6 to 8 damage distributed amongst your entire group every single villain phase. So it's going to make you want to deal with it a lot quicker. And because it's indirect damage, you're having to potentially kill off certain minions or certain allies that you have in play that you didn't want to die that way or die in that situation. So I would say it's pretty pesky, it's pretty annoying. It serves its function as a Nemesis side scheme, but it isn't too difficult to deal with, so you should be able to get it out of play before it causes too much havoc on your board. And finally, we have 3 copies of Fan the Flames. I like this Treachery card because, one, there's 3 copies of it. You're going to see it a lot, but it's neat that it's completely dependent on the side scheme and the Nemesis. So the way it works is that you take 2 indirect damage when it's revealed. If Blazing Inferno is in play, which is the side scheme, you take 1 additional indirect damage. And if Furnax is in play, you take 1 additional indirect damage. So it's very much a card where if you left Furnax in play and the side scheme in play, and then you happen to draw this card, you're going to really feel the effects of it because it's going to deal 4 indirect damage to you and your board, which is very difficult to potentially difficult to deal with. If you're playing with Groot and he has a bunch of growth counters on him and you don't have allies in play, maybe it's not a big deal. But the fact that there's 3 of them, you're going to be seeing it a lot. So I like the design of it. I like how it powers up depending on the other ones you've left on the board. It makes it so that you have extra incentive to remove the Nemesis and the side scheme quick before these come up. So overall, big fan of Fan the Flames, and I think that it has the potential to be really powerful and annoying when you draw it. And those are all of Groot's cards. So what do I think of Groot? I might anger some people here that are potentially Rocket fans who are more excited for him, but I actually preferred Groot to Rocket. Now, it was very close, so don't get me wrong, this isn't me saying, Groot's amazing, Rocket sucks. They're both great heroes that I'm having a lot of fun playing, but Groot's playstyle to me was just a little bit more interesting, or I shouldn't even say that because I think Rocket's is technically more interesting. It's definitely, there's more going on, but Groot's just meshed a little bit better, I would say, with the way I enjoy playing heroes. So managing the growth counters was really cool, and having to effectively decide how you're spending those growth counters, this new resource you're managing, saying, am I going to spend it to ready? Am I going to spend it to boost my attack? Am I going to save some to boost my defense? How low am I going to let them get before I flip to Alter Ego and replenish them to be able to do more stuff with them? Am I going to try to save a bunch on Groot and hope that I draw into one of my cards that can do like 10 threat removal or 10 damage? There's a whole bunch of things you're considering, and that managing the resources is really fun. It also just feels really great to just reliably defend so effectively. I'm constantly defending for 3 or 6 or somewhere in between, and taking no damage, removing no growth counters, and having ways to ready Groot again. So I'm constantly at max health. I'm constantly taking no damage. It feels really good to play Groot in that sense. I found him to be more effective, not solo, or I played it solo, but I played solo with 2 heroes, him and Rocket. I found that to be more effective than playing him true solo, because you had another person to sort of help out with things that are going on so that he can reliably be taking no damage. But overall, I'm a big fan of Groot. I think that, again, I almost would have preferred there to be more copies of Fruition in the deck. I don't know if that would have made him too powerful or too reliable with the growth counters, but any way to reliably add growth counters would have been great for me. But either way, I'm a huge fan of Groot. I'm excited to try him in other aspects. He's one that just so obviously fits into protection more than anything else. Like, heroes sometimes come with that protection aspect that they start with, but they are very easy to branch out into other ones, and that might not even be the most ideal one for them. With Groot specifically, I feel like protection is just the obvious choice with everything he's doing. I'm trying to imagine Groot playing him, aggression or leadership or whatever, and not have that reliable defend that I can constantly be mitigating the growth counters. If my growth counters are constantly coming out or being removed, he becomes way less powerful and way less interesting to play. You'd have to be playing in a multiplayer setting where other players can be blocking for you and helping mitigate that. So I think those are going to be, it's going to be interesting to see how he slots in with some of those. He could work in aggression or injustice or whatever, but I find that it's going to be a lot harder of a sell than it is with protection, where he just so easily slots in. So I would love to be proven wrong there, though. If you have a great deck list, you've tried him and you've had amazing results with him in another aspect, please let me know, because I'm not saying this is the definitive decision by any means. It's just that at first glance and having played with him through the campaign, protection is just such an obvious place for him to live. So Groot's a really cool hero. I had a lot of fun playing with them. I'm excited to talk about Rocket, but that's going to be in the next video. So make sure you keep an eye on the channel. Subscribing would be the best way, because we have a bunch of Marvel content coming out. I have Rocket coming out next. I got a full review on the entire Galaxy's Most Wanted, the campaign, the villains, all the new keywords, everything. We're going to have content on all the aspects and the allies that are in them. That we've already done the aggression ally video, which we went over the top 5 allies from the aggression aspect. We're going to do that for all the aspects. There's a bunch of Marvel content coming out that you're going to miss if you're not subscribed. So I would suggest subscribing so you can get all the notifications on when we drop these videos, and even other tabletop content. I mean, if you're not a huge board gamer, but you play a ton of Marvel Champions, there's also a lot of board games out there that translate really well. Take a lot of the mechanics from Marvel Champions, deck building, different things like that, put them into a different space. You might find a lot of games that you're really, really interested in. I mean, like, take it from my collection alone. I am huge into Marvel Champions. There's a whole bunch of content there that I just love playing as well. So we'd love to see you around the comments of other videos as well. Leave us a comment, leave us a like. We'll interact with you every chance we get. Otherwise, thank you so much for being here. I hope you're excited to get your hands on Galaxy's Most Wanted. Let me know in the comments of what your experiences with the box have been, what your experiences with Groot have been, which card's your favorite. I would love to hear with you. Part of the most fun of this is just interacting with you guys in the comments and being able to talk more about Marvel Champions. I think we all enjoy that a whole lot. Thank you so much for being here, and we will see you in the next one.